I sat down with Cheri Freeman-Watkins to talk about unconscious bias. Unconscious bias is a huge topic that affects pretty much every aspect of the workplace, and it's a topic many of us have talked about a lot. However, Cheri has a bit of a unique perspective on the topic. For decades, Cheri was a criminal defense attorney in Washington, D.C., and it was her work and her experiences in the courtroom that really opened her eyes to the prevalence and impact of unconscious bias in our workplaces, whether that's a courtroom or a cubicle. In this segment of the conversation, Cheri addresses two questions. What is unconscious bias actually, and where does it come from?
I love teaching unconscious bias. I love learning about it because to me, it is the nucleus, it is the core of all diversity, equity, inclusion training because it deals with the individual and how they perceive things. And it's a very personal experience. And you can either be okay with the biases that you have, but it's something that you can change and you have control of.
Now, sometimes on this topic, we hear the term implicit bias, and I asked Cheri whether that's different from unconscious bias.
Unconscious bias and implicit bias are the exact same thing. For me, I like the word unconscious conscious because implicit, explicit, it makes it more complicated to me. I prefer to use unconscious and conscious biases. They're interchangeable. If you look it up, they're interchangeable.
Then we get into the interesting conversation of where unconscious bias comes from.
It's a whole medical explanation of where it comes from. But bottom line is that since we were back in cave time days, we had to use shortcuts to survive. And so if you're a caveman and your job is to survive, you have to fight against animals, you have to fight against the environment, you have to fight against other people as well. And so you're in a constant state of fight or flight. You don't have the luxury of, if I'm come out my cave and I am going to go gather food for my family and I'm out gathering, I hear, "Rrrr." I don't have the luxury of saying, well, gee, is that a lion? Is that a bear? I don't know. So from that process and through the years, we have developed the ability to use shortcuts because our brain takes in something like 9 million trillion things of information, but our brain can't process all that. So we make these shortcuts and then we make decisions based on those shortcuts. And so when it comes to unconscious bias and what we're talking about now is when you make unconscious shortcuts about people or situations and you may create stereotypes in your mind. And so that stereotype can be totally incorrect. Some can be correct, some can be incorrect. And oftentimes they come from your parents, from your family, conversations you had around the dinner table. They come from your friends. But one of the most powerful places it comes from is from the media. And that's where images are put before you and you assume them to be correct without even thinking about it. And based on that, you act or you don't act or you include or you don't include or you feel like you're better than. So that's where it all comes from.
One point Cheri makes here that is really worth highlighting is that unconscious bias most of the time comes from outside of us. It comes from our environment, from society, from the television, from the internet. So in other words, we're not born with this baggage of biases. They're beliefs that we absorb from our environment. And so it's not our fault that we have biases, but it does become our responsibility to learn to recognize them and then do something about them. Cheri explains why we need to pay attention to our biases and what happens if we don't.
Bias morphs into racism and discrimination if it goes unchecked. So it's very powerful. And that's why I think that the work needs to be done without making people feel bad about their thoughts because they are purposely placed there. And for you to have them oftentimes doesn't make you a bad person, but to let them stay and not correct them, well, that's where I think it becomes problematic. Second thing that I think is important is that there's no need in this process for anybody to feel bad. My role in explaining to you what biases are, where they come from, and the impact that they may have on you is for you to do the work, not for me to make you feel bad, because everybody has them. I mean, I always say in my courses, are you in control of your biases or are they in control of you? And that's what we want to get to the crux of. Because if you let your biases control you, then you're not in control. You're letting other data that may not be relevant, you're letting that control you.